Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Many of the best innovators in art, science, human rights, and other important areas of life have had one thing in common. They were rebels. In some way, they refused to subordinate themselves by merely doing what was expected of them. Instead, they changed the way things were done for the better. And I'm not talking about reckless insubordination, the kind a character like Joker from Batman engages in. Instead, I'm referring to the principled version, the kind that Gandhi or MLK have exhibited, in which people followed their hearts, their moral compasses, and the world would become a better place for it. Dr. Todd Kashdan is a professor at George Mason University and a leading authority on well-being, curiosity, courage, and resilience. He has published more than 220 scientific articles, and his work has been cited more than 46,000 times, and he received the American Psychological Association's Award for distinguished scientific early career contributions to psychology. He's also the author of a book I loved that is the subject of this interview, called The Art of Insubordination: How to Dissent and Defy Effectively. I am not alone in my love for this book, as it has been praised by multiple thought leaders like Robert Cialdini, Seth Godin, and Susan David. So listen in as Todd and I talk about principled insubordination. Dr. Todd Kashdan, who's asked me to call him Todd, welcome to Super Psyched.
So excited to be here.
I cannot believe your work. And this book that you've written is so important for any time, but especially at this time. And you talk about being perhaps insubordinate, subversive, but for good. And there's a vast difference between conscientious insubordination and reckless insubordination. I was wondering if you could perhaps share what insubordination is, why it's important, and maybe representing both sets, the conscientious version and perhaps the reckless version of insubordination.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we intentionally chose a word that was going to elicit a lot of negative emotions. And then in the military, you could be removed with dishonorable discharge just by engaging in insubordination. It's basically is anytime you are in some sort of social hierarchy, and we all live in multiple social hierarchies, and you believe that the power structure is moving in the wrong direction or in an unhealthy way, and you're on one of the lower rungs, and you decide to speak up, take action, make a stand for something, this is an act of insubordination. You're basically acting out of turn. And the idea of principled insubordination is you can feel, based on the norms of what it takes to be a compassionate, helpful human in the world or in your group, that it needs to be moving in a different direction. And often, one of the interesting things about a principled insubordination act is you'll be the black sheep, especially in your group. If you think about the first person in the early 1900s to decide of, hey, maybe Frederick Douglass, as the greatest education reformer in the world, should be invited to the White House, you were the black sheep. Like, it was unheard of that someone that was black would ever be invited into the White House, much less have a meal with the president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt. But those people at that time were the principled rebels, saying, like, this is the guy. He has more knowledge about how to educate children, about how to actually get them to acquire information than anyone that we know right now. And so you ask yourself, what social dilemma, what social problem, what social issue today is my group not going in the right direction, is neglecting, where they need a principled rebel, but you will take some heat for it. And so the modern day example of a principled rebel would be someone like Tank Man, right? Tiananmen Square, you've got one guy who doesn't even have a name, just stands there with a suitcase in front of a bunch of tanks, doesn't say a word, but non-verbally is saying, this war will not take place unless you want to have a visual of running down an innocent guy in a suit who's just representing every regular person that exists right now that happens there. And to this day, people still don't know who the hell this guy was. That guy changed the war in some capacity. And then the unprincipled or the reckless or the abandoned way of actually engaging in potentially a good cause, I'm going to throw out Elon Musk, who I think is an amazing innovator, great things, in terms of if he's not talking to you and just doing things and not writing things, the guy is moving the entire society in the right direction. As soon as he takes on social communication with other human beings, they're unprincipled stances. And the reason is the assumption of malevolent intent for people that disagree with him. That standard alone interferes with free speech. That standard alone interferes with two sides or multiple sides coming together. And that stance alone makes sure that people are branded as enemies and adversaries without ever trying to understand who they are.
Such a great point. There's so many things I'd love to unpack in what you just said. But one of the things that occurs to me is the difference between bystanders and upstanders. Most of us are basically kind of sheep. We conform. Our brains are wired for that. It's helped our survival in many ways throughout the millennia. Except now, one of the things we need to do is kind of hit the Control-Alt-Delete, if you'll allow for that kind of overriding our systems. Most of us are not born upstanders. We're born bystanders. And you were talking about the idea of really conscientious insubordination, if I'm using the term correctly. I think you actually use a different modifier, not conscientious, but using it well can result in something like Teddy Roosevelt doing something awesome, or Rosa Parks, or any of the important people throughout time. You even describe a basketball player in your book, Rick Barry, who no one will emulate. He has the highest free throw percentage because he was willing to do things the wrong way. And no one has copied him since because they don't want to look. And so there are so many things I'm thinking. One of them, as weird as this is going to sound, and I'm going to just jam this in there, is even during economic downtimes, people will pay money that they don't have for plastic surgery because they want to look good to other people. And I believe it's the same wiring that causes us just to kind of acquiesce, to resign, to say yes to something we should say no to.
I love that you tied these two seemingly irrelevant things together. We have a status quo bias. And one of the status quo biases with plastic surgery, and I don't want to harm too many people that have decided to go the Botox route.
Totally. I'm not shaming them. I'm just talking about the wiring that causes us.
But it is worth, for those that have not done plastic surgery, to ask yourself, what are the intrapersonal questions you're asking yourself that's leading to this plastic surgery? And this leads to why people don't fight against the status quo. So we have a massive age bias in society, particularly weighted against women. And so that's going to push women of a certain age to go towards plastic surgery. So here are the two questions that I normally think of that are, I like to call them on the fringes of conscious awareness. So we're not always aware, and it happens in milliseconds. These two questions determine whether you're in a group, someone says something racist, sexist, homophobic, and you decide whether or not, am I going to speak up or not as everyone else is laughing? So the one question is this humility question. And there's a virtue inside your status quo bias, which is that I don't think I'm the smartest person in the room. No one else seems to be upset about this. Everyone else seems to be going in the same direction. So I must be wrong. What's one of the reasons why we don't become an upstander, become a bystander? The second question is much more about personal well-being. And you've got this whole massive industry, multi-billion-dollar industry, to make sure that we have life balance and resilience and flourishing. Choose your favorite abstract buzzword. And the question in there is it worth it to take the risk of being negatively evaluated, judged, rejected, ostracized for speaking up against the group? And so these are the two big questions that determine whether or not you're going to be an upstander or a bystander. And the beauty of reflecting on these questions is to ask yourself, at the fundamental core of your being, do you want to be the person that doesn't take risks because you're going to have some rejection in your life and have the courage to be disliked, which is the great title of a book, which I wish I came up with it myself? Or do you want to be the type of person that just melds into the group, melts in there, your position, your values, everything that you've uncovered in your life, of all the books you've read, people you've met, countries you've traveled to. You're not going to share that because you want to make sure you have 100% likability as many situations as possible. And I think when we reflect on this, we say to ourselves something that I've arrived at, which is I only want 80% likability in every situation. And I am perfectly happy having core characters that are willing to listen, tolerate, play with me, challenge me, work with me. And I can deal with 20% negativity knowing that I have the core. And I think it's worth everyone who listens to this to ask, what's your calibration? Like how much negativity from other humans? Because you're going to get it. But if you can calibrate it, then you can say, you know what? I got 100% approval on my teacher ratings this semester. Did I say anything to make them challenge or question their beliefs that they might not like, but it might be worthwhile for them to consider? That's going to lead to a reduction in that 100% approval rating. But is your goal to help them learn and consider other perspectives? Or is your goal to get them to like you?
So interesting to hear you say 80% likability. There is a term in one of the blue zones that has been coined by Dan Buettner. I think it's Dan Buettner. Came up with these blue zones where people more than average live up to 100 or more, include places like Okinawa, Loma Linda, these places, Sardinia. And one of the practices of the people in Okinawa is to fill their bellies to 80% and say they are full. And here you are saying, I want to be likable at 80%. Very similar to hara hachibu, which is the term for having your belly filled at 80%. And I've also heard you say something really important, and that is that once a professor gets tenure, they're pretty much safe, and they generally, on average, don't disturb the apple cart. You wish they would. You wish they would take more chances. And there are so many other things that you're saying that are so important in terms of our willingness to not be liked for a moment for the sake of doing what is actually right. And the idea that if everybody else is doing it, must be correct. I'm thinking about Prince opening up for the Rolling Stones, I believe in 1982. People threw apples and bottles, and 6 months later, he became known all over the world as one of the greatest musicians of all time and still remembered as such. I mean, Miles Davis himself referred to Prince as being a total genius because he was. But this is what happens to geniuses when they're doing something amazing. And we look around to my right and to my left. If they don't like it, well, then I shouldn't like it too. One last thought before I get into my next question. And that is, in high school, I was dreadfully ashamed of the fact that I loved George Michael. I thought he had a voice that was more mellifluous and perfect. And due to homophobia and misogyny and a whole host of other things, I was not allowed to like him. If I said that in a group of people, I would have been shamed. I would listen to him with my windows rolled up. It took me until I was in my late 20s to be fully out with the fact that I was a straight dude who adored George Michael and considered him the greatest vocalist of all time. And I stand by that, and I will die on that hill.
I'm loving these musical references. It's so true. So clearly we're of a certain age similar. To me, to understand feminism, to understand masculinity, to understand toxic masculinity or toxic feminism, you got to get into like the individual stories. That story about George Michael captures it beautifully because I had the exact same thing in my high school. Like, you could not publicly dress like him. You could not fill a car with your friends and play that music in your car. That happened there. So when you think about what are the unnecessary, needless barriers and forms of suffering that occur from having the cultural norm of masculinity be like the air that you breathe, the idea that the aesthetic appreciation of beauty is being morphed by the group and you are denying your own self this, that's something like everyone on earth should get their hands around and say, okay, let's start from something that we have real good like consensus upon. And from there, we'll work to the more controversial issues in terms of what's problematic and what's not problematic. But I really like, I wish I actually used that example in the book.
I'm so glad. And when I watched this documentary on the Bee Gees on HBO, and they were talking about the disco demolition that basically demolished joyful music, and especially Black music, gay-related music, stuff that would make people happy. I believe 60,000 albums were burnt in Comiskey Park, something like that. But this dude basically did this. And I remember the summer of fifth grade, and I went into sixth grade, and a girl in my class was wearing Disco is Dead, Rock is Rolling shirt. I was thinking, oh no, I have to stop liking disco also. And I joined. And I thought to myself, wow, I was one of those sheep. I was one of those people who wanted to conform rather than be an upstander. So it's embarrassing.
What I like about these examples is we moved right from geniuses to the everyday minutia that relates to everyone. And I'm so glad that you did the transition for me. I was like a very ectomorphic, skinny, scraggly. I was the kid in the comic book that got sand kicked in their face by Atlas on the back of comic books. And then one summer, I had a stepdad who was rather abusive, but it's like, listen, you got to put some muscles on your body. And I did. And it ended up being helpful in the long term, but there were costs to it. And one of them was there are choices that I made that did not match my personal preferences and interests. And so I went through all of the sports that supposedly get you the girl in heterosexual culture. So I went through football and wrestling and baseball. And then I realized like my love was the sport where nobody comes to watch. There are no spectators. Your parents don't even show up. Your grandparents don't show up. They don't even want to hear about it after if you won. And that was the shot put, just throwing a 12-pound metal ball as far as humanly possible. I fell in love with the poetry of motion, of the idea of I could take my very small physique and then master through physics and body mechanics how I could spin my body in a way to like increase power and mass and then beat people that were 3 times my size. This was like one of the origins of my interest in science. And I had the biomechanics frame by frame on my wall of Austrian Olympic winning shot putters, while everyone else had Def Leppard posters or beauty posters, male or female. And then I had like shot putters in like a sniglet that were just like on my wall. And I was obsessed with it. One way you rebel is I'm going to live a life of personal fulfillment in my own unique way. And that's where this fits in. It's a very specific type of rebellion, is that over time, people are like coming to my shot put events and being like, what is this sport that this guy is absolutely obsessed about? I never even heard of it before. And then I'd walk to school carrying a shot put in this rope carrying case to school. And people made fun of me. And over time, people then would ask, like, hey, did you win this weekend? And all of a sudden, I brought shot put to become a pseudo quasi popular sport in my high school, such that the woman that I trained who was younger than me became homecoming queen after I graduated. And she was also a female shot putter.
Female shot putter. Like, that's almost a meme. It's almost as whack to most people's minds as straight guy who loves George Michael. But what I love about this is it was intrinsically good for you. You knew that this was the right thing for you. You didn't do it for the extrinsic aspects. And most of us consider sports for exactly what you just said. And it's something that Alison Fergal talks about out of University of North Carolina, who's been on the podcast and will release soon, about we want to increase our status. And shot put in no way, shape, or form does that exactly. No one's going to want to talk to you about that extensively. But if you were playing football, they'd want to hear all the war stories. Here's the thing I want to bring up. I love that you figured out who you were at such a young age. That's very precocious. And it really speaks to a lot of things. And I'm going to morph it into friendship, because you and I both share a profound love and a great amount of thought on the subject of friendship. You talk about selecting friends and allies and net positive energizers. I have a term for these folks, but let's talk about friendship and net positive energizers versus the ones who actually may deplete.
You know, even before that, which is not in the book, my co-author of my last one, Upside of Your Dark Side, Robert Biswas-Diener, and I, we almost wrote a book on adult friendships. And then we were told that no one's interested in it. And who knows that 10 years later, Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, is talking about loneliness and friendships. This is a good warning for anyone that's creating, that don't listen to anyone who discusses what the cool trend is, because you're looking for the trend that doesn't exist that comes next. And we had a triangular model of friendship. 3 parts is duty, pleasure, and intimacy. And it holds very nicely. You and I are talking a few weeks after the presidential election. So this is a good time to be talking about what are the fundamental building blocks of friendship, because duty is the idea of If you call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, listen, I had plans for someone to pick me up at the airport, fell through. Can you get me? As your friend, like, I don't want to wake up. I know my back's going to hurt because I didn't stretch out. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Nobody should be up at 2 o'clock in the morning post the age of 50. And yet I have a duty mentally embedded in my brain as your friend that, of course, I'm going to come pick you up. Not even a question. So that's an element of it. And in there, obviously, is, level of trust, it's mutuality. But for right now, we'll just call it a duty. The second part is the pleasure. And that is that to some degree, if there aren't real problems and strains in our lives, is that like we're going to try to enjoy each other's company. And that's where the net positive energizer in is that over the course of our interactions, if you ask yourself, how does your mood change after interacting with Adam? If it keeps up being zero, I don't get worse, I don't get better over time, to some degree, there is an element of part of our friendship is not being met. I should like your company. Now, it doesn't have to be delight. It doesn't have to be enthusiasm or awe. It could just be my nervous system is relaxed in your presence and I'm calm, I'm chill, I'm effortlessly myself. I'm not second guessing what words I say. Everything is fluid. We're basically like doing like extemporaneous jazz or like improv comedy together when we're hanging out. And that is part of the pleasure part. And then the third part of this is the intimacy, is that over the course of time, gradually and reciprocally, we start to learn more and more information about each other, such that going back to improv comedy, I can make callbacks and I can say, hey, Adam, guess what I heard on the radio and I was thinking of you. All of a sudden, Faith by George Michael, the Limp Bizkit version. And I never even asked you, like, which one do you like better? The Limp Bizkit version that's the cover or the original song of Faith? And I'm thinking of you and that intimacy. When that text comes to you, it's not a couple of words on the screen. It speaks to, I think about you when you're not there. Mm-hmm. I care about your well-being. I have developed a growing working model of Adam inside me. And that holds even when we're not proximate to each other.
I love that. And by the way, Biswas Diener, the son of the great Ed Diener, who came up with the satisfaction of light scale and so many other additions to the positive psychology literature. And his son has become kind of, I believe, the Indiana Jones of positive psychology in certain ways. But you also don't peddle toxic positivity. You look at the dark side because we are humans who have both. But let's talk about, just the idea of friendship. It requires activation energy. You get a call at 2 a.m. Are you going to be there? Like, as it's saying in the Friends title song, will you be there for me? I'll be there for you because you're there for me too. There's this mutuality. I gave a TEDx talk on friendship and adulthood because it's such an important topic by my standards. And the idea of activation energy, like I've got this buddy, Bob. He lives about 100 miles away and I hate that about it. But we meet in San Francisco, which is exactly at the midpoint. And on a Saturday morning, I wake up, I'm like, crap, I'd rather just stream a whole bunch of, junk on Netflix. But I get up and for the first 30 miles, I'm just kind of not in the zone. And then I park my car. I'm like parking so hard in San Francisco. And then I see Bob. And then for the next 4 or 5 hours, it's just what you described. It's music. Yeah. And then I get back in the car and I call it the drive-away test. How do you feel after an interaction?
Yes.
And do you feel taller? Do you feel happier? Do you feel encouraged? Do you feel really championed? Or do you feel smaller, discouraged? Like the person kept on doing the back to self thing. Like, oh, well, that's interesting about you, but let me tell you about me. And they go on a long soliloquy. And it's like, oh, wow, that's not fun. I want it to be a nice equal exchange of upload and download. I believe Donald Winnicott said something akin to psychological health can be demonstrated through our ability to take in another's experience and share our own. And I love that idea. And I think that's a really good model for friendship.
The antithesis of friendship. And that's these killjoy moments where you talk about how you went to Santorini and like, oh my God, like I was taking those donkeys and going up the hill. It was like a 45-degree angle and Ios, the town right at the end of Santorini. And then all of a sudden someone says, oh yeah, I was there too. Whips out their phone, starts showing pictures. You just got back. Like you are so excited to share this brand new experience and it gets bulldozed. And all of a sudden, your positive shared experience that you brought in to increase that intimacy got crushed. That happens there. And it's really important to realize, whether in friendship or dating or serious relationships with your kids, those killjoys, it's like being stung by a wasp with like a poison. You remember the moments where your story was overwritten by somebody else, and it could be so innocent. And we're not really trained this way of you were interfering with responsiveness to a cue by someone else saying, I have something important in my life that I want to share to you. And you basically just put a blocker there. And I think
100%.
it's really important to like have a word for this, killjoy, and actually think about is like, I'm going to try to minimize that as much as possible. At a later time, I could share that I was at Santorini and show the details. But this is Adam's show. He just got back from there.
Let him enjoy the sharing. As Anais Nin said, when we write something down, we can enjoy it twice. I would actually say, like Winnie the Pooh, I love the idea of anticipating the trip, to be fully there for the trip. That's how he is with honey, by the way. He anticipates honey, he's there for the honey, and he remembers the honey.
By the way, that is Ed Diener's, one of my favorite studies by him is on that Winnie the Pooh moment. And he asked the question, which is the biggest predictor that you're going to do that positive experience again? The anticipation of the event, the online, like being in flow in the moment, or the postmortem, like savoring, as you said, like the drive away that comes there.
Savoring. You cite someone I'd never heard of, Dr. Dennis Profit, and his incredible work on the physiological and observable measures of friendship or perceived support, or whatever term you would like to use as it relates to hiking up a hard mountain or doing something difficult in our estimations when we are in the presence of someone who supports us. I was wondering if you could unpack that because it's so big.
You know, one of the fun parts of being an educator of the public about science is you get to basically put on a pedestal scientists who aren't getting sufficient attention. Dennis Profit is one of these characters. Two of his most famous findings to me that I adore is you could be standing at the bottom of a hill or a mountain and with or without a close friend. And when you were standing there with a close friend, your actual interpretation of objective data of the angle of that hill gets smaller, thinner when your close friend is next to you. You are literally changing your physical perception of the world such that hills, mountains, obstacles, setbacks are easier with that interpretation. Your cortisol is lower, your stamina is greater, your endurance is greater, your flexibility is greater, your physical strength is greater, your mental stamina is greater. And he's done other studies where, for example, if you wear a backpack or don't wear a backpack, it alters your perception of the slant of a hill that happens there. And one of the cooler findings is that wearing one of those large marine tactical backpacks, that heaviness, the effect that that has on making things seem harder is not as powerful as how having a close friend next to you makes it seem easier.
I'm going to bring up something definitely related. The Barbie doll of the past used to say to girls, math is hard. By placing that verbal virus into a girl's head will have impact just the same way that a friend or a backpack will have.
Yeah, so these are called parasocial relationships. And earlier we had talked about kind of, watching Netflix. I'm in the middle of watching Lost for the first time. Somehow,
so good.
Some way I avoided all of it. And now I'm enjoying it alone 24 years later from everybody else. And so one of the things is you form relationships with characters over time. And during the pandemic, we saw this to a great deal. There was a story in Beijing last week where there was a 14-year-old that formed a romantic relationship with an AI chatbot and was asking them for more time, and the chatbot didn't know how to respond, and they committed suicide.
Oh.
Is that in their head, going back to friendships, this is the dark side, is that people that are problematic elements in your life, family members that don't support your sexual orientation, the decisions you make about your life, is unfortunately wired in such that they truly do have an influence even when they're not there. You think to yourself, how would my father who doesn't support the fact that I'm gay relate to the fact that I'm going into a gay nightclub right now? You might decide not to make decisions in your well-being that has no influence whatsoever on anybody else because of the interwoven effect of your dad's voice, their mentality, and their thinking patterns are built into your brain in some way. And this is the work of James Cohen at University of Virginia as well, is the close people in our lives. When they experience physical pain, we respond the same way as if we were being poked and prodded and electrically shocked ourselves. And the correlations are huge.
The dark side of our mirror neurons that we can empathize, and we see Homer Simpson get kicked in the nuts, a cartoon. We feel it on some level. We tend to bend over, if we're guys in particular, because we can imagine what that would feel like. The real and the imaginal are not really distinguished in our minds. I had this relationship, a friendship, if you will, with Jon Stewart. He didn't know about it, but every morning I would wake up, and I'm not a morning person, but what I would do is I would record the show and wake up in the morning so I could wake up to something good. 2006, I bump into Jon Stewart. Unbeknownst to him, I have a massive friendship with him, and he has none with me. And it's kind of how our brains are oriented. And I'm guessing that you've even developed friendships with various characters on Lost with whom you relate, even though they'll never know that you had these.
Yeah. And if we want to take it to a different domain in the world of dating, I don't think social scientists have gone to explore this depth just yet, is if you spend a lot of your, before first meeting, you have a lot of text exchanges over the course of time, and you're actually not having the momentary spontaneous interaction that's happening there, you end up creating a level of intimacy that your relationship hasn't formed yet. As a result of this, you can often be very susceptible to strategery and tactics, and especially if you're, if you have like people that are like actually going to be a little bit like abusive or self-centered or self-absorbed in relationships, because you think you're in a long-term relationship that's built itself over the course of time. And the other part is you can be doing things before it's time and prematurely ruining the quality of the relationship because you're acting as if you're 1 year in when you're actually one date in.
Absolutely incredible. Just the idea of trying to hit the accelerator when it's not the time to do so can really just completely kablooey a good thing.
One of the things that people often forget about psychology is temporal space. There's a psychological concept of time. And one of the things that some of our technology has done, and that's interfered with our relationships, is it's warped it. And so we think because we have shared so much information and we've had such an emotional resonance to that information, that the relationship itself has actually grown in its level of intimacy, but that actually hasn't been tested in the real world, such as we mentioned before, in terms of, would you be there for me if I needed to call at 3:00 in the morning because my mom has cancer and I don't know who else to call? Or if it ends up being is that you go out for lunch and they forgot their wallet and you're like, of course I'm going to pay for you. It's not even a question that happens there. None of those normal behavioral evidence tests have occurred yet. And that's kind of a requirement to get to that intimacy portion of friendships and romantic relationships.
It's such a good point. And often we imagine, based on certain patterns, that our friends will be there for us. And it can be excruciating when we find out the truth that they're not. Or the people that we imagine wouldn't be there for us who show up, and how delightful that is. I want to get back to your book for a second, really specifically. The Art of Insubordination is such a gift. Folks are going to have to listen or read the book to find out about his, cartwheeling girlfriend who we met back in college. A visual I've never heard of. There's so many gems in this book that are great for stories, great for provocation of thinking. I want you to help us, though. We are wired to conform. How can we engage in something akin to smelling salts to help us override that drive and not just conform, and instead be good, conscientious, insubordinate people?
So we have this new data that we have yet to share with the world. We're probably going to submit it in the next few weeks from this conversation, where we've actually tested 3 different tries of an intervention to do exactly this. How can you be the black sheep of your group and say you're going in the wrong direction? And one of the things that we realized is we could remind people with actual data of how many people are silently disagreeing with the social norms of the group and are not willing to courageously be public about their opinions. I don't have the answer, but I don't think this is the way that happens there. You could think about this in teams and organizations and households. Just imagine like you're in your household and you're deciding, do we go to Disney World for the 8th time as a family trip, or do we decide to be risky and go to Thailand and go hang out with elephants that were adopted and have that strange cultural shock of not knowing Thai in the slightest, but we know what pad Thai is, and that's about it for in terms of understanding Thailand. Those are two very different vacations. And so everyone's going to have an opinion about which one is the better for them. And the question is, are you going to voice it and are you going to be persuasive? If you are the minority in the group, and now let me be clear about this because this has a very clear definition in society right now, and it's not really the definition that I think about. Minority for me is you lack status, you lack power, you lack the numbers. And we don't need to go into details of how that happens. If you're the only religious person in a community of atheists, you're the minority. If you're the only Jew in a community of people that are Muslim and Buddhist, you're the minority. And I grew up as a kid, which I talk about in the acknowledgement section, with my single mom, and I was one of the lone white people in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And so I think we have to take a step back from these terms, because if we don't understand what it's like to be the minority in a group, we're not going to be able to fix groups effectively. When you're in that position, you can't do what people who are in power and status and are socially attractive can do. If you have power, you can basically coerce people to agree publicly with whatever it is that you're thinking. You might not change their private view, but it's easy. The boss, the manager can just say, listen, these are the incentives. You don't show up in person on Friday. Guess what? I'm going to find a 21-year-old from Harvard or Stanford that's going to take your job. If you are an intern with really great ideas and you have no tenure or stability in your job whatsoever, you're in a very different place if you see problems than those people that have been around for 20 years and have the top parking space that's 1 foot away from the office. In this case, there are a few strategies that are fundamentally important. And I want to highlight one that's obvious. And because it's obvious, it's not so obvious. And that is, you have to clarify with behavioral evidence why you are a good group member before you defy, dissent, or disagree with the group. People mistake this all the time. You throw something on social media, you normally don't have a caveat of saying, before I say this hot take, this challenging view, I just want to say, you know me. You know I care about this group. Here's all the things I've done. When Walt had his 50th retirement party, who planned it? When it ended up being that we had basically didn't meet our mark and our metrics in December, who was the person that worked overtime and said, you know what, I'm going to cancel my holiday and stay 2 weeks extra in the office and do the work because I care that much about this team? And you don't feel as if you have to be humble. You are describing behaviorally that you care about this group as a setup to say, I'm not doing this to show that I'm smart. I'm not doing this to show that I'm creative. I'm doing this because I care about the welfare of the group. And I know some of you are not going to like me because my idea is going to lead to more work in the short term. So this celebrating and sharing the high quality of in-group status membership is the first step you have to take if you're a minority trying to disagree with the group.
I'm thinking about killing the messenger, that old idea that we often do that. I mean, nobody wants to hear bad news, but if there's an iceberg ahead, maybe give the bad news rather than have really bad news. And the idea of short-term, more work for long-term, less work and better outcomes, not popular. And It should be. And we don't want to kill the messenger on that. And you said something I've never heard before. Because it's obvious, it's not so obvious. And that could be a t-shirt. I love that idea. So important that we're willing to find ways to diplomatically share something that people don't want to hear. Can I have another structure that might also work, perhaps even in a social media setting where people might not want to read it, but actually need to read it?
So let's take a step back, zoom out for a second. The number one goal as a minority trying to transform a norm of a group or a team, and social media is a large group. It's a big, huge social ecosystem. is your only goal is to have your idea heard, listened to, and elaborated. People will be like, I like it, but what if you went this direction? Sucks because it's coming from you as a middle-aged white guy who works as a university professor. But if this came from someone else, I would hear from it. That's okay. Because the goal is the message. If you're going to elaborate my message and you agree with it and you think that your physicality or demographics will make it better, great. You know what I'm going to say? Hey, can you amplify this message? Because you know what? I agree with you. I think it'll actually run better under your name as opposed to my name. I'll do this publicly. I'll do it privately. So that's an important feature for you to realize is that if someone is going to start questioning little mechanics of your message or you as the messenger, ask yourself, will this interfere with the message? Or if I am intellectually humble, can I bring them in as an ally and actually leverage them to make sure the message is still heard? And I think this is a mistake all political parties and all people interested in politics get wrong in general, is that they get so obsessed about being the provider. The Richard Hatch of Survivor is like, I'm going to do the fishing and the cooking, and I'm going to take care of you. So you're not going to vote me off the island because you need me for self-preservation. I think we forget this in the realm of politics, including office politics, which is that I want to provide you a better way of doing things because I think this is going to be really problematic. And we might not have jobs in 2 years if you don't listen to me. But I don't care who says this, and I don't care if I get credit for this. This leads to one of the other strategies. Show that you have skin in the game and you are willing to be hurt and injured as a result of making this move, of saying something or doing something or being public about this. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to be seen, your scars are going to be shown, or your injuries, or the fear of being rejected is going to be visible to other people. This is going to make a lot of detractors realize, like, this is someone worth listening to. Because I'm trying to think, what's the incentive of Todd to say that the Department of Psychology at George Mason University is going in the wrong direction? Because now everybody's going to hate him because everyone else is on board the other direction. Don't let people assume that it's challenging to speak up, because some people actually view it as the fact that you will stand up and be courageous is like just a temperamental thing. You have the personality that likes attention, likes the spotlight, likes the fact of challenging other people. And that's how you get your rocks, like, for doing this.
You're talking about a kind of a provocateur.
Yeah. Right. So you want to be clear is like, I know what's going to happen if I stay silent, and I know what's going to happen if I speak up. Some of you are going to attack me. That's okay, because that's how much I care about this issue. And I think that works on social media. Again, you're not going to get 100% approval. You don't want 100% approval. And I think this happens in the workplace. And I think what we often see is people don't do these discomfort caveats, that's what I call it, up front, to buy you the inroad so that they're not going to go on their phone and they're actually paying attention. And you're triggering curiosity because you're like, what's Todd about to say that he has to give this huge prologue before he even says something? Like, this is going to be good. And that's what you want. You want attentiveness.
That's really powerful. So it sounds like the structure of some of you are not going to like this, or perhaps even me for being the messenger of this. And yet I have to share it.
Yeah. So I'm going to just like name a couple people who I don't necessarily agree or disagree with. I just think their messaging is off. So you have these environmental activists, and they're in Europe. And what they do is they basically toss paint at beautiful works of art in museum and then sit there and chain themselves to sculptures and, and paintings and pottery to say, we want to bring attention to climate change or the environment. It is such a mixed message because you're basically saying is that I care about things that have been around for long periods of time, and I want you to care about them too, the environment. But the optics of the situation is, here's something that's beautiful that's been around for a long time, and you're willing to destroy it to make your message for something that's been around a little bit longer. It's hard to take you seriously. And so the messaging is terrible. I'm going to ruin the beautification of our world through art to tell you that the environment is something you should pay attention to. I'll give you another example. A couple of years ago in Ottawa, they had a strike of truckers that refused to move because they basically wanted to make higher pay. And as soon as they said they're going to stop, block the roads, block traffic, I remember thinking to myself, who are you going to obstruct on this road? You're going to have parents that have to go pick up their kids at daycare, and the daycare workers are going to go home. You've got people who are in hospitals, pediatric wards that need blood and nutrients and food to survive. You've blocked them from getting to the hospitals, and you're blocking EMT workers and ER workers that have to get there that might be saving a couple lives as you're blocking it to make more money. And so whatever you're going to say is the reason you need more money, you've basically just showed is that I'm willing for people to physically die who are children, who are women in labor, and people that are disadvantaged who are going to ERs in the middle of the night because you want to make more money. Again, it's the optics and the clear weighing of the behavioral evidence says is that your cause has no chance once you start to think about this. But if you invert that, as I'm describing and saying, here's the pain I'm willing to absorb, I don't want you guys to absorb for doing this. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to have a pretty decent captive audience.
Wow. I mean, what you're describing, whether it's on art or obstructing traffic, it's a form of terrorism from my vantage point, and it will gain no real traction for a movement from where I stand. I don't know if you agree, but.
Well, you hit the key word, real. So you're going to get likes. Environmental activists are going to say, good for you, like you brought attention to the issue. But you don't want attention and likability. You want movement on the thing that you care about. So that one word that you said, real, like real impact, is be wary of false idols and proxies that are not the thing you actually want to move.
How do we identify false idols?
Take this election we just had, and I'll avoid playing with the blues or the reds or anything of that nature. For me, as a parent of 3 daughters who lives in a nice community, who cares about education, that's why I became a professor, who cares about science and evidence for these things, what I care about is specific evidence-based policies for everything that is trying the hardest, every policy to reduce the amount that you will inadvertently or intentionally interfere with the well-being of humans that have done nothing wrong. And so in this regard, it's really easy for me to see policymakers that are problematic to be in leadership roles in this country. So for you to be involved with the judicial system, which, I mean, my nonprofit love affair is with making sure that the punishment is always proportionate to the crime, and you take very good care to make sure that the guilty are actually punished and the not guilty are not falsely punished. These are just fundamental principles from Ben Franklin onward that happens here. You get someone in there that's too heavy on crime and is not thinking about reconciliation, and they're not thinking about is that if it's not a death sentence, these people are coming back into the community. So I want people to have evidence-based mindsets of when they come back into the community, whatever the crimes are they going to be a better or worse member of SANS community? And so if you're not addressing that, I don't really care what happens in the prison. What I care about is that you are helping them become a better person because they will have a moment of re-entry. So in this space, the false proxy is having really strong punishments for crimes is the false proxy. Because if you're not paying attention to, will the communities become better? Will people actually fear less? Will people actually have less bad things happen to them as a result of your policy? Those are the real metrics, and the size and severity of the sentences is the false proxy.
That's brilliant. So these false proxies are idols that we worship that yield the wrong outcomes. The prison system is a really good example of that because they're supposed to be rehabbed and they're supposed to come back into society, and society is supposed to be ostensibly safer, except for the fact that it's not. My friend and the DA, the elected chief legal officer of Santa Clara County, Jeff Rosen, gave a monumental TEDx talk, over 3 million views. He's the son of a Holocaust survivor, and he went to Germany to see their penal system. This is the son of a Holocaust survivor whose father suffered in Germany. And he was coming to terms with the fact that the German penal system is far superior to ours because the rehab rates are fantastic. The people go into prison and they come out better versus ours, where the recidivism is so high. So I took great notice of this. It's quite poignant. I'm going to ask you a final question before I ask you my last question, but I just need to reiterate this is going to be a book that you're going to love, folks. I mean, so much fun, so much joy, so much stimulation, and real opportunity for us to grow as human beings and become more cognitively flexible, which is the whole goal of the whole thing. But I need to ask you about diversity and diverse groups and how well they function. One of the things that I remember learning was that diverse groups get better results, except for the fact that you, in your book, note that there has to be one detail that is attended to in order for that outcome to be achieved, because diverse groups can actually go the other direction without it. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
This is really important science. And this is another example of a false idol and a proxy of what we're looking for. Diversity sounds amazing. And obviously, we're all fans of, if I could be with someone with a different perspective, different skill set, different jagged profile of strengths and weaknesses, I'm going to be a better person. If you're really good at shooting free throws, but you're terrible at shooting 3-pointers, you want someone on your team that shoots 3-pointers. Whether you're in the military or, Silicon Valley, or you're a coder or a firefighter house.
Can I just cut in for a second? Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, once said in an interview, if somebody came to an interview and was exactly like me, I wouldn't hire him because I don't need another me. I've already got me. I need someone with skills that are different from mine. But keep going.
No, what's funny about that is I often get asked, like, oh, do you wish you had a boy? Because I have 3 daughters. And I'm like, no, because if I had a little version of me with all this knowledge, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to make you like a lady killer. I would be trying to create a better version of me. But because they're so different as women, I had this like really beautiful sort of hands-off approach. And I love it. It's been my response for years in terms of, and it's also worth just putting like a pin on this, is it's a weird cultural thing that if you have 3 daughters and you're a man, people regularly ask you, don't you wish you had a boy?
And I love your response. It's beautiful.
So the thing about diversity is that as organizations, universities, everywhere that cares about it, we are pretty good at getting diverse groups because people have lots of range of interest, and ranges of interest don't match up with necessarily sex, sexual orientation, race, country of origin. There are some differences here and there, but in general, people gravitate towards all sorts of weird things. If you said like right now, like who's into scuba diving, you wouldn't draw an image of like, oh, well, yeah, it's like white males between 30 and 37. It's like, who likes going to the beach? Who likes being in the water? Who likes boogie boarding? Like, it's got to be like the link that gets you there. So we're okay at getting diverse teams. Where we're terrible is to take someone's perspective. You have to get their perspective. And I've spent 20 years in the university system. Before that, I worked on the New York Stock Exchange floor. So I've gotten, real white collar, like intense meritocracy environments. New York Stock Exchange, make money. Nothing else matters. And the education system, theoretically, the idea is you hope that people become smarter and wiser over the course of time. That's up for a debate for another podcast episode. What we don't do is we regularly bring in someone that's transgender, the first Black male to be part of your academic department. Bring in someone that has a disability. They can't hear. They're blind, that comes in there. What we don't do because of fear of having an awkward conversation is try to get their perspective and say, okay, you can't see, you can't hear, whatever their disability. We'll play with disabilities for a second. What is wrong with the environment that we've had that you arrived into? I have no idea because I've been seeing my entire life. I've been hearing my entire life. What first comes to mind that you have wrong? This newcomer bias we have of assuming is we're going to onboard them to understand the group, as opposed to because of their diverse perspective, I need to be on board into what I'm missing because there's nobody like you here. Now, this could sound like tokenism. I would ask people to be very careful about this, because if you immediately label it with malevolent intent, what happens is we skip over perspective getting and we don't extrapolate and leverage the benefits and uniqueness that they bring. And all we do is bring a unique person into our group and treat them as if they're like everyone else. And we have basically just nullified the entire reason that we aimed for diversity in the first place. And so it does require this awkward moment of saying, I know nothing about this. I need you to onboard me into what types of environments, what type of language prompts, what type of social situations bring out your strengths, what type of physical environments are kryptonite and reduce your powers, and what type of changes can we make to the environment so we actually kind of can leverage and amplify your powers. And when have you ever been in a group that has systematically done that when they bring diverse people in?
I love what you said. Perspective taking is so important. I recently attended a workshop about ableism, and it was given by people in wheelchairs, and just to hear their perspectives on things. And I also think about the research that seems to indicate that one of the ways that we can increase our empathy is by watching foreign films or reading books about people, biographies about people who are very different from who we are. And that it can really help expand the pie rather than occlude our vision, which is what we're going to do if we just reinforce what we believe all the time and hear somebody say ditto, 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 ditto all the time. That's a callback for those of you who remember a talk radio host who was really into that term ditto, which I think is terrifying, actually. It really inspires groupthink. But here's my final question. If you, Todd, had the power to confer upon all humanity one insider skill that would dramatically improve the lives of individuals, and since we are all connected, perhaps society at large, what would that insider skill be? And how do you imagine it would improve the lives of individuals and perhaps even society?
Whoa. I'm going to assume that we'll have sufficient resources.
You do.
I think we need to have more one-on-one constructive long-form feedback for people at critical junctures in people's developmental life cycle that is not their biological parents or primary caregivers, because you never know who it's going to be. I was just telling my daughters this. I had an English teacher named Dr. Cachuto. He was a doctor, and it actually blew my mind of like a doctor as a teacher in middle school. Like I couldn't make sense of it. And it was the first time that I really thought of like being a doctor is an option. And I remember he read a poem. He asked the class, can I read this poem to you? I just wrote it. I'm going to try to publish it in a magazine. And it was about anthropomorphizing punctuation. And there was a comma and a semicolon. And the semicolon was mistreated because everyone ignored it and didn't understand it. And I still remember to this day. And then afterwards, he asked us to anthropomorphize something in our lives. I think I did it about a laundry machine. It was this very terrible poem. I won an award for it, but it's a very terrible poem about trying to reduce racism with the colors of the clothes in the laundry machine. And he sat with me after class one day for like 45 minutes and was like, you have a talent. It's underdeveloped. Would you want to spend like a few minutes and I just kind of walk you through of like how I can tease this and play with this and make this like come to life? And I was like, yeah, no, I'd love to. And we just sat there. School was over. I had to go to a payphone and call my grandmother and say like, I'm not going to be home for 45 minutes. I don't know what's happening here. I'm not being left after school because I suck. I think because I've got talent. And we sat there, and I'm an author now. And if you want to go back to like origin stories of this, it's like you have moments like this, and everyone deserves these moments. It wasn't easy. It was a lot of negativity of coming at me in terms of what I did wrong, but he cared and he sat with me. And I don't think this has to be a thing about privilege. I don't think this has to be about opportunity rich neighborhoods, because you just need one person, one adult figure who sees this Michelangelo sculpture in the future, and they could affirm it and describe it and label it, even though right now you're just this disgusting, sloppy piece of marble that happens there. And this guy was just saying, it's like, hey, you take a little bit of the marble off here, off the top, you fix this over here. And I would ask, in a utopian world, that everybody gets that moment in the thing that they're passionate about. It's really kind of bringing lots of vibrancy and vitality.
So good. And clear evidence that you are watching Lost, because I remember John Locke actually talks about how Michelangelo was able to get David out of the marble. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but he said, I just removed everything that wasn't David. But I love this idea of having a Mr. Miyagi, a person in your life with a vastly different perspective who can dress you down. I remember my buddy Chuck, 10 years my senior. I was 22 at the time. He noticed that I was doing stuff that I wasn't aware of because I was a 22-year-old self-absorbed kid. And he just nailed me. And I took it all and I was better for it. So to your point, amen, my brother. Todd, thank you so much for blessing me and my listeners with your wisdom. It's so much fun to talk with you. And I'm so grateful that you wrote and spent some of your heartbeats, many of your heartbeats. As a fellow author, I know maybe too many heartbeats, but worth it on the other side. The Art of Insubordination. I know I'm not alone. I know great thought leaders like Charles Duhigg have endorsed it. And I'm just so happy for you and happy for us that we get to learn from you.
I am so happy to meet you. We are going to be friends for life, and just namaste for all the kindness you're throwing at me right now.
Namaste right back at you, and shalom. And I will pick you up at 2 a.m. when you land in San Jose Airport. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe